So my name is Dr. Chow, and I welcome you to this panel. So before we start, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves.
Okay, good morning. My name is OKWERO. It's written there that I'm head of products and services, but I'm actually head of strategy for Safaricom. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm hoping the panelists, they're also part of the panel because we're a small team so that we are all packed together. I'm Monica KERRETTS. I am at Strathmore Business School and been involved in ICT4D for a number of years, I think. Yes.
Thank you. I think my introduction is complete on the program, but I just want to warn you that I'm not an expert in this subject matter, so I came here to learn. My expertise is spectrum and broadcasting, so I'm sure I'll learn something from this esteemed panel. I advise the government on policy on spectrum and broadcasting. Thank you. The government of Kenya, that is.
Nixon Mageka, just spoken, USF member. I have, unlike him, I have a bit of knowledge on this. So I will speak to this.
Okay, so we'll start with an introduction discussion, and that is just talking about what does ICT4D mean, and especially what does the D part mean, because it usually means a lot of things to different people. So if we could briefly talk about that before we proceed. So anyone can take the question.
Yes, ICT4D simply means information, communication, and the technology for development. And the development part really means that you want to leverage on ICT to impact on socio-economic activities or development, so to speak. And as one of the things that as I was speaking, you realize that you need, first of all, to have that access to ICT, even to impact on socio-economic development. And as USAC, we support the rollout of ICT to kind of bridge the gap of the people who have and have not, so that we open up an opportunity for everyone to leverage on ICT in the area of development, whether it is, I'm passionate about agriculture, so I will talk about agriculture because in the other life, I also work in the Ministry of Agriculture. Whether it is in agriculture, enabling farmers to use simple ICTs for what we call e-extension, for example, knowing what to plant and how to plant it, you know, and also looking at the markets, whether they can get markets for and value for their products. You know, it actually is a good example of how we can use ICT to really impact on the social economic development of this country.
Okay.
Thank you. I found out that the word development means by some two people called Yavela and Kuvaya, that development is a positive social and economic change as well as the policies to achieve it. So because this definition has the word policy in it, that's why I took it. Now, for me, when we're talking about policies, the policies that are going to guide the development of the world today is the Sustainable Development Goals, which were agreed last year. There are 17 goals and 169 targets, very many indeed. For ICT, I think it's goal 4, 5, and 9 that specifically mention ICT. And if I refer to goal 9, goal 9 deals with the infrastructure, industry, and innovation. And therefore, if we are going to talk about development, we have to look at it in the context of agreed goals and targets that the world has agreed to use to move forward to the next stage by the year 2030. So I would say that anything that we talk about on development, for us to be able to make meaningful progress, should be based on those internationally agreed goals and targets. And therefore, we can be able to focus our energies and our resources and be towards these common goals and move forward. Perhaps what we need to do then is to identify specific areas. Nixon has mentioned agriculture. There could be health, maybe finance, education, transport. You've probably seen the traffic jams in Nairobi. We're talking about smart cities. So if we agree on target very specific areas, I think we can be able to progress the development of these areas to the next stage, so that when we are developing innovations, we develop them within those target areas, and we can be able to see measurable progress in these areas. So that's how I would define development. Thank you.
Okay, we can have one more
Maybe I'll
response to that,
just
please.
add and say, if I look at the World Development Report and what we've been going around the world doing, it's been trying to see what ICT really has done for development. And many times we have a lot of, good talk about ICT being very good for development. But when you actually try and quantify what ICT has done for development, then it really becomes a matter of thinking through what needs to have been done. So when I think of ICT for development, I think in terms of business. What is ICT doing in the business world? What's ICT doing in people world, which is jobs? So business growth, jobs, people, jobs, and thirdly, government services. And so when I sort of think of ICT4D in terms of thinking through what is it actually doing, we think about ICT in terms of how is it growing business? How is ICT being used to grow business? And then how is ICT being used to actually produce more jobs? And then the fourth one, of course, how is ICT being used in government for better services? And if I translate that into an even deeper level, then I begin to think of growth in terms of if I can see an actual growth, I can quantify it in business. And then if I look at it in services, I look about efficiency. And if I think about service, I also think about innovation. And so you're thinking through the idea that development is about, are we able to innovate? And then in terms of services, are we able to do it efficiently? Because you might have ICT, a lot of governments in Africa have good computers but terrible service. So is that for me development? And the answer is no. And so I think it's about us going deeper and not saying we want to have ICT for development, but actually quantifying what are we really talking about in terms of development. But let me stop there.
So how can stakeholders then ensure that ICT4D meets the potential as a driver for future business?
So I'll speak from the private sector and how we look at the ICT landscape. Generally, when we look at our business and we look at how our business tries to impact the rest of the communities or the rest of the businesses that exist or work within Kenya, we try to fit ourselves as an enabler. So Safaricom looks at itself as the person who sits in between and tries to connect people and tries to change things. And we look at it at different levels. We look at it all the way from how do we enable from the technology bit. You've seen the statistics around what the USF counts as the places that are not driven. We are very aggressive and we put more back into the network to be able to enable that we put more back into the network to be able to enable the driving of development in certain areas. If you look at what we do with people, right, and if you look at what we do with innovation, we continuously drive innovation and people, and we have a very robust structure that tries to bring in all the innovative hubs into this particular ecosystem. Of course, we can't talk about this without looking at the impact of M-Pesa as a platform, right, and opening that up and how it's been able to transform lives. Just the other day, we announced our results, and part of it was saying that right now in Kenya, we're giving out more than 1 loan per second. Right now, just a number, that's more of a technical number, but if you look at how does it enable the e-commerce and why is it that people are taking loans and paying within a very few seconds, you need to understand what it is doing in terms of the commerce at a very low level. Right? So you have people who have deals that or sales that they need to make, but they need money just for a short time for them to be able to turn this around. So we've seen that happening, right? And we've seen it driving the development. We've seen certain initiatives from other people because the platform is open. We've seen initiatives drive down the costs of capital for very many distributors. And this has allowed them to be able to, one, have more profitable businesses, and really also to try and invest in other areas. In fact, we're just having a discussion around how the cities are now moving outside and how Safaricom then follows that to try and enable. So we see ourselves largely as a platform, right, that is going to help catalyze the development in whatever shape or form that it requires. And we keep on catalyzing different places, be it the knowledge, be it opening up the platform, be it rolling out the network to bigger places to bring more people on board to enjoy that ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll add and say, when thinking through what stakeholders can do, I mean, thinking through first, I think a bit in the hidden mile, which is all the undersea cables. We tend to see ICT, but we forget the fact that costs and what stakeholders can do have to think through the entire value chain. So if I think through the entire value chain, then I've got to start from, what's hidden, which is all the kind of undersea cables that come in and the cost that a country pays to get access to that undersea cable. And I know I have Safaricom and Ken sitting next to me here, and I have Obam from government here. But Kenya has been lucky to have at least about 4 different connectivity hubs into the country. And so therefore our cost is reduced compared to many of the other African states. But I think countries have to start, when you ask what should stakeholders do, then the first thing is to negotiate for the cost that comes into the country. And the second thing is the middle mile, which is the cost across the infrastructure through the country. And that cost is still very high, I think, in this country. Even as we speak very highly of Safaricom, you look at the actual cost that a Kenyan pays to access the last mile, which is the cost at which I pay to have fiber in my house and connectivity in my house. That cost is still high. And yes, it is lower if I compare across Africa. Relatively, Kenya stands at a very low price compared to the rest of Africa, but still high when I compare it globally. And so the question becomes to how can we ensure that our stakeholders bring that cost down. And the danger with ICT is that you can create monopolies very easily. When you have infrastructure companies that go out there and are doing the last mile, and we have monopolies in companies, and sorry, no offense to you, Ken, but when we have monopolies in place, then the ability for our government to negotiate has to be very strong to ask for that last mile to come down. So what should stakeholders do? The second thing stakeholders should do is that we need to push for the cost of the last mile. And that is seeing how can the infrastructure go out, and back to a colleague over here with USF. USF has a lot of money. I think it does. But the question is, how much is USF doing to ensure that we have sustainable business? How much money is it pushing to the industry, to private sector, to small groups to ensure that, it's not about USF doing the work, it's about the people doing the work. USF should be just seeking to push out that money. And thirdly, then I think about, hubs and innovation and young people. If you look in Africa, in terms of what stakeholders can do, Africa has about 117 hubs. In the country. The last report done by the World Bank, a number of people show that 117 hubs in Africa. Leading in Africa is South Africa with 24 ICT hubs. Number 1 in Africa. Number 2 and 3, Kenya, Nigeria, 12 hubs. Half of what South Africa has across the country. And you go forth and you go through the list. And you look at innovation hubs and you look at who is funding this spurring innovation. It's either universities, it's donor agencies. So the other thing that stakeholders can do is to begin to support these young minds. I used to think I was young, but now when I'm in my 40s, I realize I'm old. And we have this amazing brains that are 18-year-olds, 19 and 20s, that have amazing skills. And we need to reduce the cost for them to be able to use this. Now, if you look at what young people unable to do is that if they are playing with monopolies, so if they're going to, in Kenya, Airtel, Safaricom, and ETC, and if I want to put my application onto your network, it'll cost a lot of money, or to the Airtel's network, it'll cost a lot of money. So what we need to do is to begin to negotiate for these young people to allow them to play in the development field. I'll stop there.
Okay, so let's continue that conversation on how what stakeholders can do on local content. And because as researchers and as people who encourage innovation, we try to talk about, to encourage people to look at local content, whether in broadcasting, whether in tech. So how can regulators, governments, and network providers put in place strategies to actually drive local content? And Obam, will come to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'll disobey you a little bit and weigh in on what was discussed before. We're talking about future business. But let's remember that 2/3 of the world's population is still not connected. So we may have 4 submarine cables, we may have 3G, 4G, the access gap study gave very nice figures, but it's from the supply side. 3G, the report is very nice on the coverage of 3G. It talks about 4G, but how many people actually are accessing that network? So why don't we connect the 2/3 that are not connected in the world? I think Kenya, the figure is even bigger than that. Then you can talk about future business. Then Safaricom can make more money so that Nixon can get more money. So Monica can even say they have more money. So I think we need to connect the unconnected and then connect them with broadband. And then the rest will follow. Now going to the question that was asked about local content. I said I'm broadcasting oriented. Look at Nigeria. Right now, if you switch on the TV, Kenyan television, we are showing Nigerian programs. But the Nigerian content did not make it because it was exported. First, they built local capacity. So I believe that we need to build local capacity for our local content. And then we must also find a way of funding development of local content. So we have some equivalent of the Universal Service Fund, maybe for development of local content. Thirdly, I think we need to establish protection of the works, that the creativity of those who develop this work, so that it is protected and people benefit for it. So that people can know that if you create something, you can get your daily bread from it. Others, maybe tax incentives dedicated specifically to local content, maybe deduction for people who do research and development, accessing grants and seed capital. In Kenya, we don't have, as far as I know, publicly funded initiatives that actually go towards creation of local content. I was in a function yesterday, another meeting, celebrating the ICT week, and the film industry was complaining. They're also looking at the Universal Service Fund to fund film development. So we were discussing and saying, why don't we have like a film development fund? How come they've never thought about that? So I think there's a need to fund local content creation, create demand for it, and then other things will follow. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, what can we do as a government to be a lead in this local content development? One is, like he says, create a universal service fund dedicated to local content. The other one is what we are actually doing is to enable the rollout of ICT to places which have not been serviced, because then that will start opening up people's ideas on how to use ICTs to develop this content. The other one also I was thinking about is the regulator should also create policies that protect intellectual property, because when for the purpose of innovation, because when somebody comes up with the idea, he should be able to have that idea and protect that idea, so that moving forward, it promotes a lot of innovation around local content development. The other one also is that I was just thinking that government should also include local content developers in some of its international trade missions for exposure to best practice, so that when you expose these local content developers to the world, then they can actually improve on the works that they're doing in terms of services, software, knowledge, and innovation. And lastly, speaking to network operators and ICT leaders to focus and reward innovation on new ICT convergence products. If you know that if you're rewarded, then you have more motivation to even develop more.
So just picking up on what you've mentioned about innovation, there's been talk of Silicon Savannah, which is the Kenya tech industry, and there has been a debate on whether Silicon Savannah is a thing of hope or a thing of hype. So the question here is there support for small to medium enterprises and entrepreneurs in general to grow the Silicon Savannah?
Okay. So I'll speak from what we are doing, and as I said, that we are partnering a lot. We partner with the Strathmore Business School, and we sponsor one of the hubs there. We even sponsor courses there. But beyond that, recently, as last year, we put up what we called a Spark Fund. Right now, the Spark Fund, the way it works for us is we are now able to pick some of these ideas that are coming out, right, and are winning certain competitions and invest in them, right, as an early investor to allow them to just really give them legs and boost them. So far, we have done 2 or 3 companies. We are seeing one of them is quite successful. It's called Sandy. So it's coming out there, and we are looking at their business models. So indeed, for Safaricom, it's also a new part in terms of how far do we stretch and what do we do. But we've seen initial success, and we'll continue funding those type of programs. Now, when I look at supporting the startups, it's not really always about money, because our analysis has shown that you have really young developers with very good ideas, with very good development skills, but these guys don't know how to set up a business, a viable, sustainable business. So part of the support that I would call out for even from other areas is really, we also need support from people who say that I know the skills, I have the skills of setting up businesses. So I will come in, right, as you win and bring in your really smart idea and show you how to create a sustainable business. How do you invest back into the business? How do you do your HR? Right? Is this the correct person to be the CEO? So that's the key thing, and that's where many of them actually struggle. Right? It's never about the idea. Now, the recent trend, and I've been in 1 or 2 of these initial fundings. We've now started seeing people coming from the US and saying that, listen, we think your idea is really good. We are going to fund you. We are going to bring you all the way to the US, right? And we're going to give you these structures around, right? So if you look at the Silicon Savannah, Kenyans have really, really good ideas, right? You have really, really good developers. And we know that 70% of the GDP is actually from the service sector. So if people are sitting down and solving problems that are happening here, I think the question is to everybody in this room, how do we help those people beyond money to be able to see, to actually reach their dreams in every facet that there is? So that's where I would, those are my comments. Yeah.
I think I'll echo Ken's words here, and I think Safaricom has actually done a lot. If I think of Strathmore, Safaricom gave us the first 20 million to set up iLab, which was an innovation hub, and sponsored the first 90 students on thinking about back-end technology. But I think one way to think about, I don't think it's hype. The question is Silicon Valley and hype. Look, Kenya is doing well because if you look at the use of innovative young minds in universities and research, you're beginning to see homegrown tech by young people. We're beginning to see them understand back-end like it's front end, so that then ABC language becomes, the language of back-end Android and back-end Java becomes very easy to use. And as these technologies become easy to use from the back-end perspective, then you begin to see innovation in the front-end perspective from the business person. So for me, I think it's not a hype. We're beginning to have young people who understand, how technology works. And the challenge is for the people who are in the front end to understand that this technology can help them. So the first challenge we have is to government, our Kenyan government. We were the only country initially listed in open data. But yes, we were at the end of the list of open data globally. I think Botswana followed us, and I think that was it in Africa, Botswana and Kenya. But then when you think about open data, we really don't have much open data. The former PS demo was a real push for open data, and which is the fact of content being available. And the challenge that the young innovators had and have Kenyans have is to be able to use that data to actually create interesting applications for government services, for better efficiency. And some of these things are not new creations or innovations if you want to think about pure goods, but they are, the use of ICT to help an existing service that was already there. What can we do as a country to begin to support them? I think Ken has echoed the value chain in terms of, giving them the business techniques. But we also need to ensure that we have IP protection. Recently at Strathmore, we brought somebody from America, Dr. Isaac Nuremberg, I forget his name. And he's in the country, been with us now, and what is he doing? He's been doing a lot of work on just training people on IP, protecting their IP, ensuring that, as we have a lot of people, as Ken says, coming into the country now, and taking a lot of the ideas from these young Kenyans and using them and saying it's theirs. And true, it's theirs because they're able to add the value chain and make it bigger. Do we have seed investors and angel investors into the country? We do. And they're there but the question is, are we ensuring that the young people have access to be able to give them the skills and this time set? Okay.
Thank you. I'll just give a few examples. I think our industry, sometimes we hype a lot of things. We hype download speeds on our networks. We hype how many people have access to our services. So we have a lot of hype, but also a lot of things happen. In terms of Silicon Valley, I'll give two examples. One, every year we have what is called the Connected Kenya, where the ICT Authority brings the industry together. Now it's Connected East Africa. And we go to Mombasa on the beach. We have a very nice discussion. But the important thing about this is that every year they have the Innovation Awards. And people are invited through an open forum, newspapers, to submit their ideas. They are judged from in the private sector, some international judges. I've participated in two of those. I've been a chief judge for two years. And then the winners are announced at that meeting. So this sort of is gaining a lot of momentum. Last year, during the ITU Telecom World in Budapest, Hungary, some of those who won and Connected Kenya were actually taken to compete at the international level, and all three of them won awards. So a lot of things are happening, so it's not just hype. Now, I'll talk a little bit about open data, because Monica talked about it, and I'm from the ministry. I think countries that implement open data, you must do it under a framework so that it's sustainable. I think that's maybe something that we don't do very well as Kenya. If you do something like open data or access to information without a framework, you'll find that it will fizzle out. So I think now there are a lot of efforts being made to make sure that we have both policy and legal frameworks that will allow proactive disclosure of information online so that people can get access to this information and reuse it for research and other purposes. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to, before we take questions from the audience, I'd like to hear any successful stories or example between a relationship between a tech startup and a large organization or even a mobile network operator. Just quickly, we can give one example, one case study of that, then we take questions from the audience.
Can I speak to the last question, because I was so prepared. He talked about something that is ongoing every year in Mombasa, and I spoke to that when I was looking at local content development, that we need really to reward some of these innovations that are coming in. That is one. But I'm also aware that ICTA, which is who are actually the organizers of that forum, have signed a 3-year partnership for funding with the Dutch government to fund 33 SMEs to a tune of 1.2 million Kenya shillings from the government side. So there are, of course, ways that we are working on to build this Silicon Valley. And of course, I'll not repeat what my fellows have said, but the only thing that I'm seeing from my point of perspective is that there is so much funding coming from the foreign world. Foreign investors coming in to fund some of this innovation. But there's little from the local initiative, of course, apart from Safaricom and a few people. I think that the challenge maybe is that we as a local people, we need also to look at ways of, putting some money on some of this innovation, so that the pickup is also high, so to speak. So I think the challenge for us really is that, do we put seed money? And even when we put seed money, the other challenge would be, if you see a startup and you give him, like, I think I like what my brother just shared about what Safaricom is doing. Most of the startup, what happens is that an investor will come, put money, and then go away. And there's no M&E to see whether that startup actually kicked off. And then I like what you said, because some of the things that we need sometimes is not even money to put in this young man's pocket. But they need mentors, people who have made it, to speak to them and tell them, listen, this is how we made it. This is how you can actually make it going forth. And therefore, I think there's a lot to be done. Of course, there's a lot that has been done, but I think there's also a lot in terms of also mentorship and programs towards mentorship training. Thank you.
Okay, so let's have an example of a successful story between a tech startup and a large organization, and then we'll take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Ken?
Okay, I think for us there are very many, because we look at it from startups who come to take advantage of the demand side, which means you look at the 26.3 million customers, you look at the platforms we have, whether it's be it the capability to bill or be it the capability to do M-Pesa, and then you supply specific services. So as I said, I'll talk about Sendi. Sendi was one of the companies who came from an idea to right now a courier service company that has it has its growth potential to being able to do distribution and take advantage of the e-commerce space that is now starting to grow within Kenya. So that's one example. We invested in that. We're seeing it coming up. We have a few other examples where we've invested, but the companies are coming up, but they're not yet there. But at least we did invest. In terms of people who take advantage of the ecosystem, we have very many people who take advantage of the ecosystem. And from M-Pesa, we actually have systems that run on top of M-Pesa that came in as tech startups. I'll talk about a company like Kopo that deals very specifically in the retail space, because they were able to innovate around and on top of the M-Pesa space. And now these companies have grown and gone to countries like Ghana and other areas. If I talk about a company like Cellulant, and you look at Cellulant's early selling of music, right, to Safaricom pushing them to learn how to use the USSDs and getting the deals now with Barclays Africa. So those are companies that have grown, and those came very, very early. If I look at a company, we have this service called Get It 411 that was done by Mobile Planet. This is an example of a very early startup, people who came with ideas, and they were supported and funded and even hosted to allow them to be able to grow their products, and they've been able to grow their products over a period of time. So there are very many people who are able to take care of the ecosystem. What I think lacks, and I'll say it again, is just really being able to provide or showing people that, by the way, you need to see that when Safaricom is connected, you actually have a demand side of 26.3 million customers who are open, right? And you have a way of being able to monetize your service. So how do you go about it? That's the key thing that I would like to show.
Okay.
Can I be the devil's advocate?
Okay.
And
then we'll
Ken is my friend and a former student at Strathmore, but allow me to be the... I think if you speak from applications, and, I think fast USSD code, I think needs to be opened up, personally. I think we speak about it and we are shy to speak about it. But if USSD code is being run by a company that has a monopoly, we continue to create certain challenges for this country, because it means that everybody has to run on the USSD code of Safaricom, which is closed, and which means that I've got to pay a certain amount of money. And because the regulator hasn't stepped in to begin to look at the relationship between Safaricom and the people who are using the over-the-top services of Safaricom's infrastructure, or whether it's Orange or Airtel, then because we're not looking at the commercial agreements made, we find that these application providers tend to suffer a lot because it might be, and I could be speaking off the top of my ear, so allow me to, but maybe a 70-30% relationship in terms of cost of margin that Safaricom gets compared to the application person who is actually creating the innovation. So I think there's a challenge in which we need to relook again at that relationship of the USSD code, and I think there's a need for this, for the regulator to begin to question. We talk about M-Pesa, but the danger we are having is that we are beginning to have a good that was private, but it's now a public good, almost. In the question that the global world, and we need to think about because we're the ones who started it, is to think of what do you do when a public good is owned by a private good? Because it's almost a public good. We've got to trade in Safaricom, M-Pesa, or Airtel's money. But that's my comment in relation to being a devil's advocate here.
Okay, may we take a question or two from the audience?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark from Telecom Orange. My question goes direct to Nixon about your Universal Service Fund. When the issue of this fund came up, the main objective of this fund was to improve the infrastructure. Actually, it was to bring those who have not been covered, the 5%, to coverage. Now, from the objective that he outlined earlier, it's achieving the soft side of the objectives, leaving the primary objective of making sure that the 5.6% that he outlined are covered, and yet he has money over 3 billion shillings he can use to erect over 200 BTSs to cover all these people. So I really don't know whether the objective has been changed or the priorities have been reversed. I just want to know.
When I say the main objective of the fund was to support provision of reliable and affordable communication services to all Kenyans, irrespective of the economic status or geographical location, and then I said this is achieved by. What I think the bullet points that you were talking about is what you're speaking to. But if you look at the main objective, that is still the main objective, what you're talking about, to cover this 5% that we are doing. But the other bullet point that I was talking about is how then do we do that? Is that?
I think then that is not what was communicated to us, probably.
Okay, Daniel has a point to quickly add.
The thing is this. From our perspective as a ministry, we support what the authority is doing. First, to be able to cover those people, we must carry out an access gap study. Once you carry out the access gap study, then you go to the fund and deploy the networks to cover those areas. So I think the next steps we should see the Universal Service Advisory Council doing is advising the authority that this is where you need to deploy these funds. So I think they started with the soft part, but we expect that they'll go to that object of building the network. Because where will you build a network if you don't know where the gap is?
Okay. We have time for just one question. The lady just next to.
Hi, my name is Ongalo Rachel. I come all the way from Kilifi, Mombasa. And my question is closely related to what he's asked in terms of the fund. How do we get access to it? Because Kilifi is really remote. And as much as we have all the statistics here, I can tell you for a fact, even in Kilifi town, getting even a 2G connectivity is a challenge, And from the operations of the company that I work in, I work with Cambry Wellcome Trust. We do medical research. There's quite a lot of clinics that are sitting in remote areas where we need to access information from those clinics for our scientists to be able to do meaningful research. But it's really a challenge. Recently, we went down with the Safaricom team, and from their statistics, they could see that we have coverage in those areas from the statistics from the book or from Safaricom head office. However, when we go to the ground, they realize there's nothing at all on the ground. So my question is, how does the authority come in? How do we access, infrastructure in those areas to support what we are doing? We currently have about 300 researchers in Kilifi town international and local researchers that need to do medical research that influence policy. So we really need that infrastructure to come in and help us, drive health research.
Okay, so that's that's the last question we'll take because our time is up, and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Let me say this. If we had that money, I can assure you we would have covered Kenya today. But there are certain things that we are looking at. First of all, like he said, we have done a gap analysis of ICT. We have seen where the gaps are. There are areas that are priority areas because of other factors like security and all that. We have limited resources. 3.9 against 750 million US dollars is no money. It's the same question, like the MP keep throwing words that, my area, there is a place which is not covered, why can't you cover it? And the same answer is that if you had all the money, we would have covered it. But the priority is, and that's why the access gap study is very important, to look at where is the need very much. And then we then allocate a subsidiary. We're not giving all the money to that area. We allocate subsidiary to telcos and tell them, can you take this service to the people? And and that is based actually from the study, because even to decide on what project to support is always a discussion with stakeholders. Because again, you'll also realize that the telcos also have their projections on where they are going. So some of the analysis that we do is that if Safaricom, for instance, will be in Kilifi in 2019, we cannot use that money to put infrastructure there, because then we know that they will roll out there, right? And those are some of the guidelines that we look at. If in their license of obligation, they have said, or Airtel or Telecom Kenya, in their license of obligation have said, in 2019, we will be rolling out to a certain place. So we said, if Safaricom is going there, then we need to use this money and take it somewhere else where nobody has committed to come to. So these are some of the things that we consider when we narrow down to how do we use this money to close that gap.
Okay, Ken, please just close that very briefly.
Okay, so just to support what he said, what we've seen, in fact, as of, I think last week we announced our results, and we've seen a pace of close to 40% increase in data consumption on our network. Right now we're carrying about 100 terabytes per day. So what this is showing us is that Kenyans are requesting and requiring to be connected more. We've seen an increase in smartphones, right? We've seen people moving out like my colleague here, moving out and going into places that were not covered previously, right? All this is now forcing both the private and those who are working for the public good to come together and plan even better, right? The research that you're doing in Kilifi, right? These are new things that people are doing, right? There are people who are doing even videos. We know that there's heavy consumption of data, right? So we have very many parameters that are moving, right? And as a company that is committed to transforming lives, we are also now looking and saying, how can we be able to provide this particular services to you at a cheap cost or at a viable cost? There was a question that was asked earlier about how do we use, why isn't the USF only being used to roll out sites? And I think that's what you're trying to say. Some of those places that we thought were not viable, like Kilifi, are now starting to become viable, right? So some of the areas that they thought would roll out, they found out that they need other services other than just connectivity. So a lot is being done in Kenya, right? And you just need sometimes to sit back and look at the map of Africa, look at the map of the world, look at the pace, right? And sometimes appreciate how fast we are moving. So indeed, we've taken in the comments, right? And we shall look at it and see how can we make it even better, and how can we work closer with the government and the USF to be able to provide even better service for everybody. So that's how I would close it.
Very lastly, I've just remembered something, that part of the access gap study, the consultant developed a portal that actually has the whole map of Kenya and designates all the gaps that you can. It is open to the public. You can go to the website of the regulator and check where are we in terms of the study, the patches that are unserved and underserved are detailed there in that portal. Of course, the information that the public has and the information that the regulator has may be different, but for the public interest is just to know that this is where we are, and this is how the coverage of the networks are in Kenya in terms of telecommunication, ICT, telecommunication and broadband. So that is available. You can go to the website and check it out.
Okay, we'll stop on that note. I encourage the conversation to continue after this. May we take a moment to thank the panelists for their participation, and thank you to the audience as well.